Chapter 1, The Ghost at the Feast. The silver tray trembled in Astria's hands. Just a vibration. A subtle rattle of crystal flutes against polished metal that betrayed the terror rotting in her gut. She tightened her grip until her knuckles turned the color of old bone. Breathe. Just breathe. Around her, the pack hall roared with the sound of victory. Alpha Gregor's birthday celebration had turned into a riot of spilled wine, roasted venison, and boisterous laughter that scraped against Astria's eardrums like sandpaper. She moved through the crowd as a shadow. A ghost in a servant's gray wool uniform. Invisible. Disposable. Survivable. That was her mantra. She was not lovable. She was not chosen. She was merely something that had failed to die when her bond snapped 3 years ago. More wine, a warrior barked, thrusting an empty goblet into her path. Astria poured. The red liquid swirled, dark as arterial blood. She did not look up. Eye contact was a privilege for the worthy, and she had lost that status the day Liam rejected her. Liam. The name was a splinter in her mind. Even thinking it summoned a phantom ache in her chest, a hollow space where a mate bond should have anchored her soul. She felt his presence before she saw him. The air shifted, charged with the ozone scent of high-ranking power. She turned. A mistake. Liam stood near the head table. He looked magnificent, glowing with the golden vitality of a future alpha. His arm was draped possessively around a slender woman with hair like spun sunlight. His true mate. His Luna. They laughed at something the alpha said. Liam leaned down, whispering into the woman's ear, and the intimacy of the gesture struck Astria with the force of a physical blow. It was not the rejection that killed her anymore. It was the casualness of his happiness. He had destroyed her world and simply moved on to build a better one. Astria forced her feet to move. Step after step. Away from the light. Away from the warmth. She retreated toward the kitchen shadows, desperate for the sanctuary of steam and noise where she could not see them. Her wolf, usually curled in a dormant ball of depression, let out a low, pathetic whine. Quiet, Astria commanded the beast. Do not beg. A hand clamped onto her shoulder. Heavy. Calloused. She froze. The tray tilted dangerously. Not that way, girl. The voice belonged to Beta Marcus. He smelled of cigars and dried blood. He did not look at her face, he looked at the tray, then gestured vaguely toward the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall. The doors that led to the council chambers. The Alpha requires your presence, Marcus grunted. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked through her veins. Servants were never summoned to the council unless they had committed a crime. Had she spilled something? Had she looked at the Luna with too much malice? I have done nothing, she whispered. The words tasted like ash. Move, Marcus ordered. He gave her a shove, hard enough to make her stumble but not enough to drop the crystal. The emissaries are waiting. Do not keep the king waiting. King? The word made no sense. They had no king here. Only Alpha Gregor. Unless he meant the rumors. The stories whispered by the fireside about the north. Astria abandoned the tray on a side table. Her hands shook uncontrollably now. She wiped them on her apron, trying to scrub away the tremor, but the dread was bone deep. She walked toward the massive doors, feeling the eyes of the room shift. The laughter didn't stop, but the tenor changed. It became sharper. Crueler. They knew something she didn't. She pushed the doors open. The silence inside was absolute. It swallowed the noise of the party instantly, replacing it with a suffocating tension that smelled of ink, wax, and impending doom. Chapter 2, A Currency of Flesh. The council chamber was a mausoleum of shadows. High vaulted ceilings trapped the gloom, and the only light came from a hearth fire that burned low and angry. Alpha Gregor sat at the head of the long mahogany table. His face was a map of scars and ruthless decisions. To his right sat 3 strangers. They were massive. larger than any wolf in the southern pack. They wore furs that looked like they had been stripped from prehistoric beasts, black and gray pelts that swallowed the firelight. They did not smell like the pine forests of the south. They smelled of ice. Of iron. Of old, spilled blood. Astria stopped in the center of the room. The floorboards creaked under her worn boots. She kept her head down, staring at the intricate patterns of the rug. Astria, Alpha Gregor said. His voice lacked warmth. It was a business tone. You have served the pack well since your change in status. He meant since Liam dumped her. Since she became nothing. I try, Alpha, she replied. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. War has threatened our borders for 2 winters, Gregor continued, his fingers drumming on the wood. The Northern Kingdom demands tribute to maintain the ceasefire. They require resources. Grain. Iron. He paused. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. And they require a guarantee, one of the strangers spoke. His voice was a rock slide, deep and grinding. A life to bind the treaty. Astria's breath hitched. A sacrifice. They wanted a sacrifice. The Alpha King, Gregor said, emphasizing the title with a mixture of reverence and fear, has requested a mate. Not a true mate, for the moon goddess has not granted him one. He requires a consort. A breeder to secure his line. The room spun. Astria locked her knees. I do not understand, she managed to say. I am a rejected wolf. I am broken. I cannot be a Luna. Exactly, Gregor said brutally. You are of noble blood, Astria, even if you are damaged goods. You have the pedigree, but you have no mate to challenge the claim. You are the only highborn female I can spare without weakening my political alliances. She was not a person. She was a line item. A piece of currency to buy safety for the pack that had scorned her. Who, she asked. She had to know. Who would take a rejected female? The stranger in the center stood up. He was a tower of black fur and leather. He looked at her with eyes that held zero pity. You belong to Cale Thornblack now, the warrior declared. The name sucked the oxygen out of the room. Cale Thornblack. The mute king. The alpha of alphas. The monster who ripped throats out with his bare hands and never spoke a word. Legend said he was cursed by the goddess herself, a beast so violent she took his voice so he could never command a pack, yet he ruled them all through sheer terror. No, Astria whispered. It was an involuntary reflex. It is done, Gregor snapped. He stood, signaling the end of the discussion. The end of her life. You leave within the hour. Do not embarrass us, Astria. Your obedience saves this pack. Your defiance will destroy it. He didn't look at her as he said it. He looked at the northern warriors, seeking their approval. He was selling her to a butcher to save his own son's inheritance. Astria looked at the strangers. They were not looking at her face. They were assessing her hips. Her stamina. Determining if she would survive the journey, or perhaps, if she would survive their king. She realized then that she had been wrong before. She wasn't survivable. She was barely currency. Pack your things, the lead warrior commanded. The king does not like to wait. Chapter 3, The Northern Wind. 1 hour. That was all it took to dismantle a life. Astria stood by the rear gate of the pack compound. The celebration still raged inside the main hall, oblivious to the girl shivering in the dark. She held a single canvas bag. It contained 2 dresses, a comb, and a small wooden wolf her father had carved before he died. That was it. That was the sum total of her existence. The night air had turned sharp. A sudden drop in temperature heralded the arrival of the northern convoy. 4 massive black SUVs idled at the perimeter, their engines purring with a menacing, low-frequency rumble. She did not look back at the Alpha's house. She did not look toward Liam's window. If she looked, she might scream, and she refused to give them the satisfaction of her sound. She would be as silent as the monster she was being sent to marry. "Get in," the warrior from the council room grunted. He held the door of the second vehicle open. Astria climbed into the leather interior. It smelled of peppermint and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the rustic sense of her home. The door slammed shut, sealing her in. The lock clicked with a finality that sounded like a prison sentence. The convoy began to move. They rolled away from the cobblestone paths, hitting the asphalt road that snaked through the forest. As the miles accumulated, the landscape began to mutate. The lush, rolling greenery of the southern lands gave way to jagged rocks and towering pines that blocked out the moon. Snow began to fall. First as light dust, then as heavy, wet flakes that plastered against the tinted windows. Astria stared at her reflection in the glass. Pale skin. Dark eyes that looked too old for her 22 years. A mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "He kills his mates," the rumors whispered in her head. "The mute king breaks them." Suddenly, a jolt went through her. It started at the base of her spine, a spark of electricity that arced upward and slammed into her chest. Astria gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Her wolf. The inner beast, which had been a silent, weeping thing for 3 years, suddenly stood up. It shook its fur. It paced inside her mind, restless and alert. "What is it?" Astria projected the thought inward. "Is it danger?" The wolf did not signal fear. That was the terrifying part. It signaled awareness. It was sniffing the air, pressing against the barrier of her mind, trying to get closer to something. The sensation intensified as the car climbed higher into the mountains. It wasn't the bond she had felt with Liam. That had been warm, like sunlight. This was different. This felt like gravity. It felt like the pressure of the ocean floor. Dark. Heavy. Inescapable. Astria gripped the door handle. Her breath fogged the cold glass. They were crossing the border. She could feel the ancient magic of the boundary wash over the car, a static charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. "We are entering Thornblack territory," the driver announced to the warrior in the passenger seat. The warrior nodded. "Radio the king. Tell him the package is secured." The package. Astria closed her eyes. The electric hum in her blood grew louder, a buzzing that rattled her teeth. Her wolf let out a howl in the silence of her mind, not a mournful sound, but a challenge. Or perhaps a greeting. She was driving into the belly of the beast. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel numb. She felt hunted. And the part of her that was still wild, the part that Liam hadn't managed to kill, turned its face toward the north and waited to see what kind of monster waited in the snow. Chapter 4: The Gravity of Ice. The northern citadel did not look like a castle. It looked like a weapon carved from the mountain itself. Jagged spires of black stone pierced the gray sky, tearing at the clouds until they bled snow. Astria shivered as the SUV rolled through the iron gates. The cold here was not weather. It was an entity. It possessed teeth that gnawed through the glass and bit into her marrow. Guards swarmed the vehicle the moment it stopped. They wore armor crafted from white dragon scales and wolf pelt, their faces obscured by helmets that mimicked the skulls of dire wolves. "Out," the driver commanded. Astria stepped onto the frozen cobblestones. Her breath misted in the air, vanishing instantly in the gale. She clutched her canvas bag against her chest, a pathetic shield against a world made of steel and violence. The courtyard smelled of sulfur and pine resin. It was the scent of a forge. A tall woman with severe gray eyes awaited her. She wore the crimson sash of a high steward. "Follow," the woman said. "No welcome. No pleasantries." They walked through corridors so wide a battalion could march 5 abreast. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for Astria's ankles. Her boots clicked rhythmically against the obsidian floor. Click. 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 A countdown to her judgment. Her wolf paced frantically in her mind. The beast scratched at the back of her eyes, whining with an urgency that bordered on madness. "Stop it," Astria hissed internally. "You will get us killed." They reached a set of double doors that dwarfed anything in the southern pack. These were made of weirwood, pale and ancient, bound in bands of meteoric iron. The steward pushed them open. The throne room was a cavern. At the far end, atop a dais of raw granite, sat the Alpha King. Astria's heart seized. She had expected a monster. She had expected scars and deformity. She found a god of war carved from marble. Cale Thornblack was massive. He lounged on the throne with a lethal grace, one hand resting on the armrest, the other toying with a heavy gold ring. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, falling over eyes that burned with a terrifying, unnatural violet light. He looked up. Their gazes locked. The world vanished. It was not a spark. It was a nuclear event. A shockwave slammed into Astria's chest, knocking the air from her lungs. Her canvas bag hit the floor with a dull thud. Heat, blistering and absolute, erupted in her veins, incinerating the cold of the north in a microsecond. "Mate." Her wolf screamed the word. It was a roar of possession. A howl of recognition that shattered 3 years of numbness. Astria staggered back. This was impossible. She was broken. She was rejected. Fate did not make mistakes twice. Yet the pull was undeniable. It was gravity. It was the tide obeying the moon. Cale stiffened. His hand crushed the armrest, stone crumbling to dust under his grip. He stood slowly, unfolding his massive frame until he loomed over the court like a thunderhead. He did not speak. He could not. But the silence that radiated from him was louder than any scream. It was a physical weight that pressed Astria to her knees. She fell to the stone floor, gasping, drowning in the violet fire of his eyes. Chapter 5: The Silent Sentence. The court went deadly still. Every advisor, guard, and noble in the room held their breath. They saw the stone crumble under their king's hand. They saw the foreign girl drop to her knees. They smelled the change in the air, the sudden, overwhelming scent of ozone and cedar clashing with vanilla and rain. Astria trembled on the floor. Her body betrayed her. Every instinct screamed at her to bare her neck, to submit, to crawl toward the source of this terrifying heat. "Claim me," her wolf begged. "Please." She bit her tongue until copper flooded her mouth. She would not beg. She had begged Liam once, clutching his boot as he walked away, and that memory was a scar she refused to reopen. Cale descended the dais. His steps were silent. For a man of his size, he moved like smoke. He stopped inches from her. Astria stared at his boots. Black combat leather, reinforced with steel toes. Boots meant for crushing skulls. He crouched. A finger, calloused and hot, hooked under her chin. He forced her head up. Up into the violet abyss of his gaze. There was no love there. There was shock. There was fury. And beneath the rage, there was something else. A flicker of something that looked dangerously like hunger. "My king," a wizened advisor stepped forward, his voice trembling. "This is the Southern tribute?" "She smells used." Cale's head snapped toward the advisor. The movement was a blur. A low, vibrating growl ripped from his chest. It wasn't a word, but the meaning was clear: silence. The advisor turned pale and retreated. Cale looked back at Astria. He studied her face, tracing the line of her jaw with his eyes. He was searching for a flaw. He was looking for a reason to reject the bond that tethered them together. Astria waited for the rejection. She braced herself for the pain of the bond snapping again. It would kill her this time. She knew it. Her soul could not survive being torn in half twice. "Do it," she thought, tears stinging her eyes. "Finish me." Kale pulled his hand away as if burned. He stood abruptly, turning his back on her. He walked to the nearest guard, snatched a spear from the man's grip, and slammed the butt of the weapon onto the floor. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot. He pointed at Astria. Then he pointed to the ceiling. To the upper chambers. He made a sharp, cutting motion across his throat, then pointed at the guards. If anyone touches her, they die. It was a command. A decree of protection. But it was not a claiming. He had not bitten her. He had not marked her. He had simply placed her in a glass jar to be observed. Take her to the east wing, the steward translated, her voice shaky. The king commands she be kept. Kept. Like a pet. Like a prisoner. 2 guards hauled Astria to her feet. She looked at Kale's broad back. He refused to look at her again. His shoulders heaved, as if he were fighting a physical battle to keep himself from turning around. The bond pulled at her, a hook in her navel dragging her toward him. But the guards were stronger. They dragged her away, out of the warmth, back into the corridor shadows. Astria realized with a sinking horror that this was worse than rejection. Rejection was a clean break. This was purgatory. He would not let her go, but he would not let her in. Chapter 6, The Viper in the Sheets. The east wing was a gilded cage. Astria stood in the center of a bedroom that was larger than her entire childhood home. Silk tapestries depicted great Huns of old. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast a boar. The bed was a monstrosity of velvet and furs, 4 pillars of carved ebony reaching toward a frescoed ceiling. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. She was alone. The guards had locked the door from the outside. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the silence, a reminder that luxury did not equal freedom. Astria walked to the window. It overlooked a sheer drop into a ravine. Far below, a river raged, black water churning against sharp rocks. There was no escape. She sat on the edge of the bed. Her body still hummed with the aftershocks of the meeting. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Violet. She felt the phantom pressure of his finger on her chin. Why? Why protect her? The stories said the mute king slaughtered anything that threatened his control. A mate, especially a weak, rejected mate from the south, was the ultimate threat. She was a weakness he could not afford. Maybe he is saving you for later, a dark voice whispered in her mind. Maybe he likes to play with his food. She needed to wash the scent of the road off her skin. She found a bathroom attached to the chamber, a space of white marble and gold fixtures. She splashed freezing water on her face, gasping as the shock cleared the fog in her brain. She was drying her face with a plush towel when the hair on her arms stood up. Not the bond. Not the electric hum of Kale. This was different. This was the prickle of malice. Astria dropped the towel. She spun around. The bedroom was empty. The fire crackled innocuously. But the window she had looked out of moments ago was unlatched. A draft of icy air curled across the floor, extinguishing the nearest candle. Shadows lengthened. Astria backed toward the bathroom door. Who is there? Silence answered. Then, a ripple in the darkness. A figure detached itself from the heavy velvet curtains. Clad in tight black leather, face masked, holding a dagger that dripped with a green, viscous liquid. Wolfsbane. The king has too many distractions, the assassin whispered. The voice was female. Sibilant. You are a loose end. Astria scanned the room for a weapon. A poker by the fire. A heavy vase. All too far. The assassin lunged. Astria threw herself to the side. The blade slashed through the silk of her dress, missing her skin by a millimeter. She rolled, scrambling across the rug, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Help! She screamed. Guards! The heavy oak door muffled her cry. No one came. The assassin laughed, a low, cruel sound. She adjusted her grip on the knife. He cannot hear you. And even if he could, do you think he cares? You are bait, little southerner. Nothing more. Bait? The realization hit Astria harder than the floor. Cale hadn't put her here to protect her. He had put her here to draw out his enemies. She wasn't a guest. She was a tethered goat waiting for the tiger. The assassin stepped closer, raising the blade for a killing stroke. Astria scrambled backward until her back hit the cold stone of the fireplace. She grabbed a log from the pile, wielding it like a club. Come on then, Astria snarled. The fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard anger of a survivor. She had survived Liam. She had survived the journey. She would not die in a stranger's bedroom. The assassin's eyes narrowed. She sprang. And the door exploded inward. Chapter 7, The Red Signature. Splinters of oak rained down like deadly confetti. The heavy door did not just open, it disintegrated under the force of a battering ram that breathed and bled. Cale Thornblack stood in the ruin of the archway. He was a nightmare unleashed. His chest heaved, ripping the buttons of his ceremonial tunic, exposing skin that flushed with the chaotic heat of berserker rage. He did not look at the assassin. He looked at Astria. His violet eyes swept over her, cataloging every scratch, every tremble, every rapid pulse of her terrified heart. The assassin hissed. She knew she was dead. She knew it, yet she lunged anyway, a desperate strike of a cornered rat. Cale moved faster than thought. He did not shift. He did not need the wolf to be lethal. He caught the assassin's wrist in midair. The sound of bone snapping echoed through the room, a dry, sickening crunch like stepping on autumn leaves. The assassin screamed. The sound was cut short as Cale's other hand clamped around her throat. He lifted her off the floor. Her feet kicked uselessly against his shins. Her leather boots scuffed the obsidian tiles. Astria watched, paralyzed. She had seen violence in her old pack. She had seen dominance as fights. But this was different. This was industrial. This was efficient. Cale squeezed. There was no hesitation. No demand for surrender. He was not fighting a warrior, he was exterminating a pest. The assassin's eyes bulged. The dagger clattered to the floor, the green poison hissing as it touched the stone. With a wet, final crack, the woman went limp. Cale dropped the body. It hit the floor with the heavy indifference of a sack of wet grain. Silence rushed back into the room, louder than the violence. Astria pressed her back against the cold stone of the fireplace. The log slipped from her numb fingers. She expected him to leave. She expected him to call the guards to clean up the mess. Instead, he turned to her. He stepped over the corpse. He walked through the shattered wood. He closed the distance between them until his scent, rain, iron, and fury, drowned out the metallic tang of blood. He reached out. Astria flinched. Cale froze. The pain that flashed across his face was raw. It was an open wound. He hated that she feared him. He hated it more than the assassin lying dead at his feet. He lowered his hand slowly, keeping it open. Palm up. A peace offering. He pointed to her arm. A thin red line where the dagger had grazed her. Astria looked down. She hadn't even felt the sting. It is nothing, she whispered. Just a scratch. Cale shook his head. His jaw clenched. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief of white silk. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, enveloping her in his heat. He dabbed the blood away with a tenderness that terrified her more than his rage. The contrast broke something inside her chest. How could hands that just crushed a windpipe be this gentle? He met her eyes. The violet fire was gone, replaced by a bleak, dark ocean of guilt. He pointed to the dead woman. Then he pointed to himself. My fault. The message was clear. They hadn't come for her because she was weak. They came for her to hurt him. Chapter 8, Rules of the Hunt. Morning light bled gray and cold through the shattered window. The room had been cleaned while Astria slept in a guest chamber, the evidence of death scrubbed away with lye and lemon oil. But the memory of the snap remained. Astria walked the corridors of the citadel. She was no longer guarded by 2 warriors, she was guarded by 6. They formed a phalanx around her, a wall of white scale armor that separated her from the rest of the world. She felt less like a guest and more like the crown jewels, precious, inanimate, and heavily insured. She entered the great hall. The atmosphere was thick with whispers. Courtiers in furs and velvet huddled in clusters, their eyes darting toward her before snapping away. They knew. Everyone knew. The king's new toy had almost been broken. Kale sat at the head of the long table. He was reading a scroll, his brow furrowed. An untouched plate of food sat before him. When Astria entered, he did not look up, but his hand clenched into a fist on the table. He knew exactly where she was. The bond acted as a radar. She dismissed the guards with a wave. They hesitated, looking to Kale. He gave a microscopic nod. They retreated to the perimeter. Astria walked to the table. She did not sit. She gripped the back of the heavy chair opposite him. "You need to send me back," she said. Her voice was steady, though her knees were water. Kale looked up. His face was a mask of stone. He stared at her, unblinking. "I am a liability," Astria continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "I am a weapon they can use against you. Last night proved it. I cannot defend myself against your enemies. I will only make you weak." She expected him to agree. It was the logical choice. The alpha choice. Cut the dead weight. Kale stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. He walked around the table. He moved with that predatory grace, eating up the space between them. He stopped inches from her, forcing her to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. He reached out and took her hand. He placed it on his chest, directly over his heart. Thump. 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 It beat like a war drum. Strong. Steady. Unafraid. He shook his head slowly. "No." "Why?" Astria demanded, frustration bubbling up. "I am rejected. I am nothing. Why keep me?" Kale released her hand. He reached for a knife on the table, a fruit knife with a silver handle. Astria flinched, but he turned the blade toward himself. He carved a single word into the wooden surface of the table. The wood curled away under the sharp steel. "Mine." He stabbed the knife into the wood at the end of the word. It was not a romantic declaration. It was a territorial fact. It was a law of physics. The sun rises in the east. The snow falls in the north. Astria belongs to Kale. He looked at her, his eyes burning. He traced the air between them, outlining her shape. Then he made a fist and brought it to his chest. "You stay." "They will keep coming," Astria argued. "Next time they might succeed." Kale stepped closer. His chest brushed hers. The sparks of the bond ignited, sending shivers racing down her spine. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. He did not speak. He breathed. A warm, jagged exhale that smelled of mint and danger. He pulled back and looked at her with a fierce intensity. He tapped his temple. "Think." He gestured to the room. To the watching courtiers. To the guards. He wanted them to come. The realization hit Astria like a bucket of ice water. He wasn't just protecting her. He was using her presence to flush out the traitors in his court. He was inviting the attack so he could see who held the knife. She was the bait. But for the first time, looking at the savage determination in his eyes, she realized he had no intention of letting the bait be taken. He was the trap. And God help anyone who touched what was inside it. Chapter 9, The Sound of Ruin. The evening feast was a display of barbaric splendor. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted elk, spiced wine, and winter root vegetables. Banners of the allied northern packs hung from the rafters, the white wolf of the tundra, the iron bear, the shadow cat. Astria sat at Kale's right hand. It was the seat of the Luna. The seat of the queen. The silence in the hall was deafening as she took her place. Every alpha in the room stared at her. Some with curiosity. Most with contempt. Is this the little southern stray? The voice boomed from the lower tables. Alpha Gregor of the Iron Clan stood up. He was a massive man, nearly as big as Kale, with a beard braided with copper rings. He held a goblet of wine, swaying slightly. His scent was sour, cheap ale and arrogance. The hall went quiet. Kale did not move. He continued to cut his meat, the silver knife slicing through the venison with surgical precision. I heard the southern alpha gave her away for a few sacks of grain, Gregor laughed, looking around for support. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. A fair trade, I suppose. Though the grain might have been more useful in bed. Astria stiffened. The insult was crude, typical of drunk warriors, but it stung because it echoed her own deepest insecurities. She stared at her plate, willing herself to disappear. Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Tell me, girl, Gregor shouted, emboldened by Kale's silence. Is it true your first mate threw you away? Did he find you too cold? Or just too boring? He took a step toward the dais. If the king tires of you, perhaps I can take you off his hands. My kennels need cleaning. Kale stopped cutting. The sound of the knife hitting the porcelain plate was soft. A tiny clink. But in the silence of the hall, it sounded like the hammer of a gun being cocked. Kale stood. He did not look at Gregor. He looked at Astria. He saw the flush of shame on her cheeks. He saw the way she bit her lip to keep from crying. Something inside the king snapped. The air in the room grew heavy. The pressure dropped. Candles flickered and died as if the oxygen was being sucked out of the space. Kale turned to Gregor. The Iron Alpha's smile faltered. He took a half-step back. I only jest, my king. A warrior's humor. Kale walked down the steps of the dais. The bond inside Astria flared. It wasn't just heat this time. It was pain. It was a red-hot needle piercing her heart. She felt his emotions flood her system, a tidal wave of possessiveness so dark, so violent, it choked her. He is going to kill him, she realized. He is going to rip him apart right here. Kale stopped in front of Gregor. The king was taller, broader. He loomed over the insubordinate alpha like a collapsing building. Gregor bared his neck, a sign of submission, but it was too late. Kale's hand shot out. He grabbed Gregor by the throat and lifted him. Not just off the ground, he lifted him high into the air, arm fully extended. Gregor clawed at Kale's wrist, his legs kicking, his face turning purple. The room watched in terrified awe. Kale brought Gregor's face close to his own. The king's lips curled back. His canines extended, sharp and gleaming in the torchlight. A sound began to build in Kale's chest. It started as a vibration that rattled the silverware on the tables. It deepened into a growl that shook the floorboards. It rose, higher and louder, a tectonic grinding of vocal cords that had not been used in a decade. The silence of the mute king was breaking. MMM. The sound was raw. Guttural. Painful. It was the sound of a mountain trying to speak. MMM. Mine. The word exploded from him. It was a roar. A command. A declaration of war. He threw Gregor. The massive Alpha flew across the room, crashing through a heavy oak table, splintering it into kindling. He tumbled to a stop against the stone wall and did not move. Kale stood in the center of the wreckage, his chest heaving. He turned back to the room. His eyes were glowing so bright they looked white. He scanned the faces of his subjects, daring anyone else to speak. Daring anyone else to breathe. He turned to Astria. He held out his hand. Come. Astria stood. Her legs shook, but she walked down the stairs. She walked past the stunned nobles. She placed her hand in his. His grip was bruising. He pulled her against his side, tucking her under his arm, shielding her from the gaze of the court. He didn't look at Yerrick again. He led her out of the hall, leaving a room full of shattered wood and terrified silence in his wake. He had spoken. For her. Chapter 10, The Echo of a Roar. The words still rang in Astria's ears like the tolling of a funeral bell. Mine. It had been hours since Kale dragged her from the great hall, yet the vibration of his voice seemed to linger in the stone walls of the citadel. He had claimed her before the court. He had broken a decade of silence to mark her as his property. But he had not marked her skin. Astria paced the length of the king's private study. Her heels clicked a frantic rhythm against the hardwood floor. Outside, the northern wind howled against the glass, a chaotic symphony that matched the turmoil in her chest. Kale stood by the fireplace. He had his back to her, staring into the flames. His posture was rigid. Tension radiated from him in waves of heat that she could feel from 10 feet away. You cannot just say that and walk away, Astria said. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with the raw exhaustion of confusion. Kale did not turn. He gripped the mantle of the fireplace until the stone groaned under the pressure. Look at me! Astria demanded. She crossed the room. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle of his bicep. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that nearly buckled her knees. The bond was starving. It screamed for completion. It demanded that he turn around and finish what he started in the hall. Kale spun. His movement was a blur of violence and grace. He pinned her with his gaze. His violet eyes were wide, the pupils blown black with desire. He looked like a man hanging from a cliff by his fingertips. Why? Astria whispered. The anger drained out of her, leaving only a hollow ache. You claim me in front of them. You kill for me. But here, in the dark, you treat me like a disease. Like I am something you caught and cannot get rid of. Kale closed his eyes. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face. He wanted to touch her. The air between them crackled with the static of his restraint. He pulled his hand back. He turned away again, walking to the heavy oak desk that dominated the center of the room. He snatched a piece of parchment and a quill. The feather snapped in his grip. He grabbed another. He wrote furiously. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper was loud in the silence. It sounded like claws on bone. He thrust the paper at her. Astria took it. The handwriting was jagged, sharp, and hurried. Silence is not a choice. It is a lock. I don't understand, Astria said, looking up at him. You spoke tonight. You broke the lock. Why can't you break it for me? Kale slammed his fist onto the desk. The wood cracked. He pointed to his chest. Then he pointed to the door. Because if I let you in, I will destroy you. The message was clear in his eyes even without the ink. He wasn't rejecting her because she was unworthy. He was rejecting her because he believed he was a bomb, and she was the spark. Chapter 11, The Curse of the Black Heart. Astria stared at the cracked desk. The violence of his reaction frightened her, but it also ignited a curiosity that burned brighter than her fear. Kale Thornblack was not a cruel man. Cruel men did not clean wounds with silk handkerchiefs. Cruel men did not shield rejected girls from the mockery of drunk alphas. He was a desperate man. "Show me," Astria said. Her voice was soft but unyielding. "Don't write riddles. Show me the truth." Cale hesitated. He looked at her for a long moment, searching for any sign of flight. When he found none, he let out a ragged breath. He walked to a bookshelf that lined the far wall. He pulled a lever hidden behind a row of ancient tactical manuals. A section of the shelf clicked and swung open. A safe. From the darkness of the iron box, he retrieved a book. It was bound in black leather that looked disturbingly like skin. The cover was etched with silver runes that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. He placed the book on the desk between them. He opened it to the middle. The page was illuminated with a terrifying illustration. A wolf, black as night, stood over a pile of bones. But the wolf was weeping blood. Above the image, the text was written in the old tongue. Astria could not read the ancient script, but she recognized the diagram. It was a cursed structure. A blood hex. Cale tapped the page. He picked up the quill again. He wrote on the margin of the ancient book, defacing the artifact with fresh ink. The first Thornblack made a deal with a demon to win a war. The price was love. Any soul cherished by a Thornblack king dies a violent, agonizing death within the turning of a moon. Astria read the words. The air left her lungs. She looked at the previous pages. A list of names. Dates. Causes of death. Amara, poison. Ilera, hunted. Seraphina, madness. Generations of Alpha Kings. Generations of dead mates. You think... Astria started, her voice trembling. You think if you claim me, I die? Cale nodded. His eyes were wet. The stoic mask had shattered, revealing the terrified boy underneath. He wasn't mute because he couldn't speak. He was mute because he was afraid that acknowledging his heart would trigger the executioner. That is why you stay silent, she realized. To keep the bond weak. To keep me at a distance. He nodded again. Astria looked at the book, then at him. The rejection she had felt for weeks, the shame of being ignored, it all evaporated. He wasn't pushing her away because she was broken. He was pushing her away because she was the only thing in the world he wanted to keep alive. She reached out. This time, he did not pull away. She placed her hand on his cheek. His skin was burning hot. He leaned into her touch, a starving man accepting a crumb of bread. I am already dead, Cale, she whispered. My first mate killed the girl I was. I am living on borrowed time. I would rather spend that time with a king than a coward. Cale froze. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, and for the first time, the hunger in his eyes wasn't just physical. It was reverent. He leaned in. His forehead rested against hers. The contact sent a shockwave through the room. The candles on the mantel flared bright, the flames dancing wildly. He wanted to kiss her. She could feel the urge trembling in his body. But he stopped. He pulled back, just an inch, terrified that a kiss would seal her warrant. Chapter 12, The Shadow Council. The library was quiet, but the Citadel was never truly asleep. Astria left Cale's study an hour later. Her mind was a whirlwind of new information. She walked down the dimly lit corridor toward her wing, her fingers trailing against the cold stone walls. She felt lighter. The burden of being unwanted was gone, replaced by the terrifying weight of being endangered. She turned the corner near the council chamber. The heavy doors were cracked open slightly. A sliver of yellow light spilled onto the floor. Voices drifted out. He is unstable. It was the high priest, Malachar. His voice was like dry leaves skittering on pavement. He spoke, another voice hissed. It was Lord Varric, the king's uncle. He broke the silence for a southern stray. The curse will activate. You know the history. Astria froze in the shadows. She pressed herself into an alcove, holding her breath. If the curse activates, the kingdom falls into chaos, Malika replied. The demons come to collect. We cannot allow him to fall in love. The risk is too great. Then we remove the risk, Varric said. The sound of a goblet hitting the table followed. We cannot kill her. Kale would burn the north to the ground. She must leave. She must reject him. And if she refuses? Then we make her believe that staying will kill him, Varric said darkly. The curse works both ways, Malachor. Or at least, we can make her think it does. If she loves him, she will leave to save him. If she stays, she is selfish, and we will have grounds to execute her for treason. Astria clamped a hand over her mouth. They were plotting. They weren't just going to kill her, they were going to manipulate her into destroying Kale's heart to save his life. She backed away slowly. Her boots made no sound on the rug. She reached her room and locked the door. She leaned against it, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They were right. Not about the treason, but about the danger. As long as she was here, Kale was fighting a war against his own nature. He was torturing himself to keep her safe. And now, his own counsel was sharpening their knives. She looked at the wardrobe. She walked over and pulled out the canvas bag she had arrived with. It looked pathetic on the silk sheets. She wasn't running because she was scared. She was running because she loved him. And because she loved him, she couldn't let him become the monster who added another name to that book of death. Astria began to pack. Her hands shook as she folded the gray wool dress. She placed the wooden wolf carving on top. I am not the queen, she thought, tears finally spilling over. I am the sacrifice. She went to the desk in her room. She pulled a piece of paper. She would write him a letter. She would tell him that she couldn't handle the cold. She would lie. She would break his heart to save his life. Because that was what you did when you chose someone. You bled so they didn't have to. Chapter 13, The Wolf in the Snow. The wind possessed teeth. It gnawed at Astria's exposed skin as she trudged through the knee-deep drifts. Her breath tore from her lungs in ragged white clouds. Every step was a battle against the mountain itself. The citadel was a dark smear against the horizon behind her, a place of warmth she had forfeited to save a man who was never hers to keep. She clutched the canvas bag to her chest. Her fingers were numb. The cold had moved past pain into a dangerous, sleepy heaviness. Keep moving, she ordered her legs. If you stop, the frost takes you. A howl shattered the night. It was not the distant cry of a wild pack. It was close. It was deep. It vibrated in the marrow of her bones. Astria froze. She spun around, boots slipping on the ice. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. It was massive. A beast of midnight fur and muscle that moved over the snow with impossible speed. The Alpha. He did not slow down. He did not circle. He collided with her. The impact drove the air from her body. They tumbled into a snowbank, a tangle of limbs and fur. The heat radiating from him was a furnace blast against the Arctic chill. Kale shifted. The snap of bones rearranging was a wet, sickening sound that echoed in the clearing. In seconds, the wolf was gone. The king hovered over her, naked to the waist, steam rising from his skin in the freezing air. His face was a mask of terrifying fury. He grabbed her shoulders. His grip was iron. He shook her, once, hard enough to rattle her teeth. Why? He roared. The word was rusty. Broken. But it carried the force of an avalanche. Astria stared up at him. She saw the panic in his violet eyes. She saw the terror of a man who thought he had lost the only thing that mattered. I cannot stay, she lied. Her voice was thin, brittle as old glass. I do not belong in your cage, Kale. I want to go home. Kale froze. He stared at her mouth, watching the lies form. He reached out and placed a hand over her heart. It hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Liar. The accusation burned in his gaze. He didn't need to speak it. Her body betrayed her treason. Her wolf whined, clawing toward him, desperate for his touch. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at the blood trickling from his nose, the cost of speaking. The cost of the curse. You run to save me, he rasped, the words tearing his throat. You think you are the hero. He leaned down. His forehead rested against hers. The heat was overwhelming. It melted the snow beneath them. You are not the hero, Astria, he whispered, his voice failing. You are the heart. And if the heart leaves, the body dies. He scooped her up into his arms. He did not ask permission. He did not negotiate. He turned back toward the citadel, carrying her through the storm as if she weighed nothing more than a ghost. Chapter 14, The Glass Fortress. The return was a spectacle of defiance. Kale kicked open the side doors of the great hall. The oak splintered inward. He strode into the warmth of the castle, covered in snow, half-naked, cradling the fugitive southerner against his chest. Servants froze. Guards lowered their pikes. Lord Varric stood at the far end of the corridor. The king's uncle looked at the pair with eyes like flint. He did not look surprised. He looked disappointed. She tried to leave, nephew, Varric said, his voice smooth and dangerous. Perhaps you should have let the trash take itself out. Kale did not stop. He walked past his uncle, his shoulder checking the older man with enough force to send him stumbling. The king's silence had returned, but his aura screamed violence. He carried Astria up the grand staircase. He did not take her to the guest wing. He did not take her to the prison. He took her to the royal suite. The doors slammed shut behind them, locking out the world. Kale carried her to the massive bed and set her down on the furs. He stood back, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning her for frostbite. Astria sat up. The room smelled of him, cedar, ozone, and the metallic tang of magic. They will destroy you for this, she whispered. Varric. The council. They know about the curse. They want me gone. Kale paced the room. He grabbed a tunic from a chair and pulled it on, covering the expanse of his chest. He turned to her, his expression grim. He walked to the window that overlooked the courtyard. He pulled the heavy velvet curtains back. Below, the guards were assembling. Not in formation for defense, but in formation for a siege. They were turning inward. The black banners of the Thornblack line were being lowered. Kale watched them. He did not flinch. He turned back to Astria. He walked to the bedside table and picked up a heavy iron key. He placed it in her hand. Lock the door. He communicated the command with a sharp nod. Astria looked at the key. It was cold and heavy. Where are you going? He pointed to the floor. To the council chamber below. He was going to face them. He was going to walk into a room full of vipers who wanted him to remain a weapon, not a man. He grabbed his sword belt from the stand, buckling the heavy scabbard around his waist. The leather creaked. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was brief. Hard. A seal on a document. He pulled away and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the latch. He looked back at her one last time. Stay. Then he was gone. Astria scrambled to the door. She shoved the key into the lock and twisted it. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thud. She backed away, her heart pounding. She was safe in his tower. But he was down there alone. Chapter 15, The Gilded Trap. Time dissolved into a sickening blur of anxiety. Astria paced the royal suite. 1 hour passed. Then 2. The silence of the citadel was unnatural. No servants came to light the fires. No guards marched in the hallway. It was the quiet of a held breath before the scream. She went to the window. The courtyard was empty. The snow fell in heavy, silent sheets, burying the world in white. A sound came from the fireplace. Astria spun around. The massive stone hearth, cold and dark, began to grind. The back wall of the fireplace rotated. A secret passage. Astria grabbed a heavy brass candelabra from the table. She raised it like a club. Figures emerged from the soot and darkness. They were not assassins. They were worse. High Priest Malachar stepped out, his red robes trailing in the ash. Behind him stood 4 members of the elite guard, men who had sworn to protect the king with their lives. "Put down the toy, child," Malachar said. His voice was dry, a snake sliding over gravel. "Get out," Astria warned. She backed toward the locked door. "The king will kill you." "The king is occupied," Malachar smiled. It was a ghastly expression that showed too many gums. "Lord Varric is currently presenting evidence of your crimes to the clan Alphas. Bewitching the monarch. Use of forbidden blood magic to enslave his will. Treason. Lies," Astria spat. "Politics," Malachar corrected. He snapped his fingers. The guards surged forward. Astria swung the candelabra. It connected with a helmet, a satisfying clang of brass on steel, but the impact jarred her arm to the shoulder. A gauntlet hand grabbed her wrist. Another arm wrapped around her throat. She kicked. She screamed. She fought with the desperation of a trapped animal. "Kale!" she shrieked. The name tore from her throat, echoing off the stone walls. "He cannot hear you," Malachar said, stepping closer. He pulled a scroll from his sleeve. "By the authority of the council and the preservation of the Thornblack line, you are under arrest." The guard tightened his grip on her neck. Black spots danced in Astria's vision. Her lungs burned. The room began to tilt. "The trial is at dawn," Malachar whispered, leaning close to her face. "And the execution is at noon." They dragged her toward the dark maw of the fireplace. Astria dug her heels into the expensive rugs, leaving furrows in the fabric. She reached out, her fingers brushing the heavy oak door. "Kale." The bond inside her flared with sudden, blinding panic. He felt it. Somewhere in the castle, he felt her terror. A distant roar shook the foundations of the citadel. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Malachar's eyes widened slightly. "Hurry. Before the beast breaks loose." They shoved her into the darkness of the tunnel. The stone wall ground shut behind them, sealing the room. The royal suite was empty. The key was still in the lock. And on the floor, the brass candelabra lay where it had fallen, the only evidence that the Queen of the North had been stolen from her own sanctuary. Chapter 16, The Theater of Lies. Astria was not walked into the great hall, she was displayed. 2 guards dragged her by the arms, her feet barely touching the flagstones. The room was no longer a place of celebration or feasting. It had been transformed into a tribunal. Rows of elevated benches formed a semicircle around a central cage of iron bars. The air sat heavy with the scent of unwashed bodies, burning sage, and the metallic tang of anticipation. Every clan Alpha from the Northern Alliance sat in judgment, their faces grim masks carved from suspicion. They threw her into the cage. Astria hit the cold metal floor hard. The impact jarred her shoulder, sending a spike of nausea through her gut. She scrambled to her knees, gripping the bars. Her eyes scanned the room frantically, searching for the only face that mattered. He was there. Kale sat on his throne, but he did not rule this room. Chains of shimmering blue steel bound his wrists to the armrests. God's stone. The only metal capable of dampening an Alpha's power. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought against the restraints. His violet eyes locked onto hers, burning with a helpless, terrified rage. He opened his mouth to roar, to command, but no sound emerged. A collar of the same blue metal clamped tight around his throat, stealing his voice once more. Lord Varric stepped into the center of the ring. He wore the black ceremonial robes of a prosecutor. He held up a small velvet pouch for the crowd to see. "We found this under her mattress," Varric announced, his voice projecting to the rafters. Nightshade. Crushed bone. And a lock of the king's hair tied with human sinew. A gasp rippled through the gallery. "Witchcraft," an elder from the Bear clan spat. "Lies." Astria screamed. She rattled the bars. "I have never seen that. He planted it." Varric turned to her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a predator's expression, calm and assured of the kill. "Do not insult the intelligence of the council, girl. You are a rejected female with no prospects. You came here, saw a king vulnerable to his own curse, and decided to enslave him with blood magic to secure a crown." He gestured to Kale. "Look at him. He broke a decade of silence for you." "A miracle?" "No. A symptom of possession. You twisted his mind until he risked the safety of the entire North just to keep you as a pet." Astria looked at Kale. He was shaking his head violently. He strained against the chains until the metal bit into his skin, drawing blood that trickled down his arms. He was fighting, but the god stone was too strong. "I love him," Astria cried out. The truth of it felt pathetic in this room of vipers. "I would never hurt him." "Love?" Varric laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Love does not require spells. Love does not risk the death of a beloved. If you truly loved him, you would have left. But you stayed. You dug your claws in." He turned back to the Alphas. "She is a parasite. And by northern law, a parasite that threatens the Alpha must be excised." The crowd murmured their agreement. It was a low, ugly sound, like the growl of a collective beast. Astria sank back against the bars. She realized then that the truth did not matter. The evidence did not matter. This was a play, scripted by Varric to seize power, and she was merely the prop being burned in the final act. Chapter 17, The Severing. The high priest Malachar approached the throne. He carried a chalice filled with a dark, viscous liquid. He stopped before Kale, who looked at the cup with recognition and horror. "The bond must be broken," Malachar intoned. "The witch has tethered her soul to yours. We must dissolve the link to free your mind, sire. It is for your own salvation." Varric stepped up to the cage. He looked down at Astria through the iron slats. "Watch closely, Southerner. Watch him choose his kingdom over your bed." 2 guards held Kale's head back. He thrashed, his boots slamming against the dais, but the god stone drained his strength. Malachar forced the chalice to the king's lips. He poured the liquid down Kale's throat. Kale gagged. He coughed, his body arching in a spasm of agony. Astria screamed. She reached through the bars, her fingers clawing at the empty air between them. "Stop it! You are killing him." The effect was instantaneous. Kale slumped back against the throne. His eyes rolled back, the violet light dimming to a dull, bruised gray. The defiant tension left his body, replaced by a slack, drugged stupor. Malachar turned to the crowd. "The king is cleansed. Now, he must pronounce judgment." The priest leaned close to Kale's ear. He whispered something, a command laden with hypnotic suggestion. Kale's head lolled forward. He looked at the cage. He looked at Astria. But there was no recognition in his gaze. The bond, which had always felt like a taut golden wire connecting their chests, suddenly went slack. Then it went cold. It was as if someone had poured liquid nitrogen into Astria's veins. She gasped, clutching her chest. The emptiness was worse than physical pain. It was a spiritual amputation. "Reject her," Varric commanded the dazed king. Send the witch to her death. Cale's lips moved. No sound came out. He raised a trembling hand and let it fall. A gesture of dismissal. A gesture of apathy. The hall erupted. He rejects her. Varric roared triumphantly. The king has cast her out. The spell is broken. Astria stared at Cale. He was looking through her, staring at the far wall with dead eyes. Had he chosen? Or was he gone? It didn't matter. To the world, he had just signed her death warrant. She stopped screaming. She stopped fighting. Her hands slid from the bars and fell to her sides. She had asked herself if she was worthy of being chosen again. The answer, delivered in a cage before 1,000 hateful eyes, was a resounding no. She was not the heroine of this story. She was the mistake. Take her to the block, Varric ordered. The cage door groaned open. Rough hands grabbed her. Astria did not resist. She was a puppet whose strings had been cut. She let them drag her away, her eyes fixed on the man on the throne until the heavy doors slammed shut, severing her from the only light she had ever known. Chapter 18, The Grave of Hope. The dungeon cell was a stone box buried deep in the earth. It smelled of mildew and centuries of despair. Water dripped from the ceiling with a maddeningly slow rhythm. Drip. Pause. Drip. Pause. A metronome counting down the seconds of her life. Astria sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest. She should have been terrified. She should have been bargaining with the guards, looking for a loose stone, planning an escape. But she felt nothing. The numbness was absolute. It was a thick, gray blanket that smothered her fear and her hope in equal measure. She thought of Liam. He had rejected her for ambition. She thought of Cale. He had rejected her for survival. Perhaps the defect was not in them. Perhaps it was in her. Some souls were not meant to be anchored. Some souls were meant to drift until they dissolved. It is time. The voice came from the darkness beyond the bars. A masked executioner stood there, holding a torch. The flames cast long, dancing shadows against the damp walls. Astria stood up. Her legs were steady. She smoothed the wrinkles of her torn dress. If she was to die, she would do so standing. She would not give Varric the satisfaction of dragging a weeping girl to the slaughter. I am ready, she said. Her voice surprised her. It was calm. Flat. The executioner unlocked the cell. He led her up the spiral stairs, past the other cells where prisoners watched with hollow eyes. Up and up, toward the surface. Toward the biting cold of the northern day. They emerged into the courtyard. A heavy wooden platform had been erected in the center. A chopping block sat ominously in the middle, stained dark with old use. The entire court had gathered. They stood in silence, wrapped in furs, watching the spectacle. Snow began to fall. Large, soft flakes that landed on Astria's lashes. She walked the path to the scaffold. She did not look at the crowd. She did not look at Varric, who stood near the block, preening like a vulture. She looked at the sky. It was a vast, indifferent gray. She climbed the stairs. 1, 2, 3. The executioner gestured to the block. Astria knelt. The wood was rough against her knees. She placed her neck on the groove. It smelled of iron and blood. She closed her eyes. I release you, Cale, she thought, the words a silent prayer sent into the void. I release you from the guilt. I release myself from the hope. She waited for the bite of the axe. She waited for the end. But the blow did not come. Instead, a vibration started in the wood beneath her. A tremor. Then a shake. A sound ripped through the courtyard. It was not a command. It was not a plea. It was a name. Astria! The shout shattered the air like a thunderclap. It was raw, broken, and impossibly loud. Astria's eyes snapped open. She lifted her head. At the top of the citadel stairs, the double doors had been blown off their hinges. Kale stood there. The chains were gone. The collar was twisted metal on the floor behind him. He was not looking at Varric. He was not looking at the executioner. He was looking at her. And his eyes were violet fire. Chapter 19, The Voice of the Storm. The executioner's axe froze at the apex of its arc. The heavy steel blade caught the gray light of the morning, trembling in the hands of a man who suddenly realized he was standing between a god and his prayer. Astria! Kale took a step onto the landing. The stone beneath his boots seemed to crack with the sheer weight of his presence. He was no longer the drugged, docile prisoner from the tribunal. The god's stone had failed because the bond had not been dissolved, it had been weaponized. The forced apathy of the high priest's potion had been incinerated by the raw, primal terror of seeing her on the block. Lord Varric was the first to find his voice. Kill her! Execute the witch now! The executioner lunged, bringing the axe down. Kale didn't run, he blurred. He vanished from the stairs and reappeared on the scaffold in a feat of speed that defied physics. He caught the handle of the axe mid-swing. The wood snapped like a twig in his grip. With a backhanded strike, he sent the masked giant flying off the platform, crashing into the stone fountain below. Kale turned to Astria. He dropped to his knees in the blood-stained snow. His hands, still raw and bleeding from the chains, cupped her face with a desperation that made the air thrum. He wasn't looking for a queen, he was looking for his soul. My name. Astria whispered, her voice cracking. You spoke my name. Kale leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. His breath was jagged, tasting of copper and the bitter herbs of the potion. Astria, he rasped again. The word sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass, but it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Mine. Always, mine. The violet in his eyes flared, blooming until the white disappeared entirely. The air around them began to ripple. The curse, the ancient, dark energy that had haunted the Thornblack line, surged to the surface, looking for a target. It began as a black mist swirling around his ankles, a physical manifestation of the deal made with demons centuries ago. The curse! Malachor screamed from the safety of the balcony. It is activated. She will die. The darkness will take her. The black mist rose, coiling around Astria's throat like a spectral noose. It was the violent, agonizing death promised to any mate of a Thornblack king. Kale saw it. He didn't pull away. He didn't try to shield her with his body. Instead, he grabbed the mist with his bare hands. He pulled the shadows into himself, his skin turning obsidian where the curse touched him. He was absorbing the death meant for her, inviting the demon's price into his own heart. No, Kale! Astria cried, grabbing his wrists. It will kill you. He looked at her, a bloody smile tugging at his lips. Then, we die, together. Chapter 20, Defying the Moon. The black smoke intensified, a hurricane of shadow centered on the scaffold. The alphas in the courtyard retreated, shielding their eyes from the blinding, dark radiance. It was a battle of wills between a man and a 1,000-year-old debt. Kale's skin began to crack. Veins of violet light pulsed through the darkness covering his arms. He was a vessel overflowing with power he was never meant to hold. If I was rejected once, am I still worthy of being chosen again? The question echoed in Astria's mind. She looked at Kale, seeing the agony etched into his face, seeing the way he was literally tearing himself apart to keep the darkness from touching her. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a piece of currency. Kale, look at me, she commanded. She reached up and grabbed the black iron collar of the curse. She didn't try to push it away. She pulled it toward her. If the curse demanded a heart, it would have to take hers while it was joined to his. I choose you, she whispered into the eye of the storm. Not as fate. Not as a bond. I choose you, Kale Thornblack. She pressed her lips to his. The contact was a lightning strike. The world turned white. The black mist didn't just dissipate, it shattered. The sound was like 1,000 mirrors breaking at once. The ancient blood hex, built on the premise that a king's love was a weakness, foundered against a mate who chose back with equal ferocity. The pressure in the air vanished. The snow began to fall softly again, no longer driven by the wind of a demon's spite. Cale pulled back, gasping. The obsidian tint on his skin faded, leaving behind only the glow of a man truly alive. He looked down at his hands, then at her. The silence in his mind was gone. The lock was broken. The curse, he said, his voice becoming clearer, deeper. It didn't break me. It broke, for you. Astria looked toward the balcony. Varric was white-faced, his hands trembling on the railing. Malachor had already vanished into the shadows of the temple. Cale stood up. He didn't look like a man who had just survived a death sentence, he looked like a king who had just found his crown. He reached down and hauled Astria to her feet. He didn't hide her behind him this time. He stood her at his side, shoulder to shoulder. The silence is over. Cale's voice boomed across the courtyard, echoing off the mountain peaks. The debt is paid. Every wolf in the courtyard dropped to their knees. It wasn't the submission of fear. It was the recognition of a power that had moved beyond the old laws. Chapter 21, The Final Stand. The transition from the scaffold to the throne room was a march of reclamation. Cale didn't wait for the council to reconvene. He strode through the main doors, Astria's hand locked in his. The guards, seeing their king restored and speaking, threw the doors open with a fervor they had lacked for years. Lord Varric was waiting by the throne. He had a dagger drawn, not a wolfsbane blade, but a ceremonial obsidian knife. He looked manic, the desperation of a man who had seen his coup collapse in a single heartbeat. "You are a monster!" Varric shrieked. "You have invited the girl to our bed and the demons to our gates. You are unfit." Cale didn't draw his sword. He didn't even shift. He simply walked toward his uncle with the calm inevitability of the tide. "I am the king," Cale said. The authority in his voice was a physical force that made the tapestries flutter. "And you are a traitor to the blood." Varric lunged. He was a seasoned warrior, but he was fighting a man who had just swallowed a curse. Cale caught Varric's wrist, twisted the knife out of his hand, and forced him to his knees with a single hand on his shoulder. "I could kill you," Cale whispered, loud enough for the gathering alphas to hear. "I could feed your heart to the crows for what you did to her." He looked at Astria. He was asking her. The decision was hers. Astria stepped forward. She looked down at the man who had mocked her, caged her, and tried to behead her. She remembered the girl who wanted to stay invisible. She remembered the girl who thought she was disposable. That girl was gone. "The North has seen enough blood," Cale, Astria said. Her voice was clear, resonant. "Exile him. Let him live in the frozen wastes without a pack. Let him see if his politics keep him warm at night." Cale nodded. He beckoned the guards. "Take him. Strip him of his name. If he is seen south of the Iron Peaks, kill him on sight." Varric was dragged out, screaming curses that no one listened to. Cale turned to the room. He looked at the alphas of the North, the men who had sat in judgment of his mate. He didn't wait for their approval. He took Astria's hand and led her up the steps of the dais. He sat on the throne, but he didn't stay there. He stood, pulling Astria into the center of the platform. "You asked me if I would claim you," Cale said, turning to her. He didn't care about the court anymore. He only cared about the woman who had walked into a storm for him. "I do not claim you as a tribute. I do not claim you as a guarantee." He knelt. Before his court, before his enemies, before the moon. "Astria of the South," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you choose me?" Astria felt the final remnants of her old life, the rejection, the shame, the gray wool dress, fall away. She reached out and touched the crown on his head, then slid her hand down to rest against his heart. I chose you in the snow, Kale, she whispered. I choose you every day after. The hall erupted in a roar of approval that shook the very foundation of the mountain. It was the sound of a kingdom being reborn. But as the cheers filled the air, Kale leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. The war isn't over, my queen, he murmured, his eyes flashing with a new, sharp light. Your old pack, your former mate, they are at the gates. And they have come to take back what they think is theirs. Astria pulled back, her eyes narrowing. A cold, hard smile touched her lips. Let them come, she said. I have a king now. And he's finally found his voice. Chapter 22, The Reckoning of the Weak. The Southern Pack did not arrive with the thunder of a king, they arrived with the desperate scramble of a dying debt. At the base of the obsidian cliffs, the southern convoy looked like a line of ants against the grandeur of the north. Leading them was Alpha Gregor and Liam, their furs looking thin and moth-eaten in the face of a true mountain winter. Astria stood upon the battlements. Beside her, Kale was a pillar of shadow and silver, his presence vibrating with a voice that no longer needed to be used to be felt. Below, her former life was shivering. They look so small, Astria whispered. The wind whipped her hair, now adorned with a circlet of white gold, across her face. Kale stepped behind her, his chest a warm wall against her back. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. That is because you have grown, Astria. To a giant, the world is always a toy. The iron gates of the citadel groaned open. Liam stepped forward as the royal pair descended. He looked at Astria, and for a second, his eyes flashed with the old, arrogant hunger. He didn't see the queen who had broken a curse, he saw the disposable girl he thought he could reclaim now that she had value. Astria! Liam called out, his voice cracking in the thin air. We heard of the coup. We came to rescue you. My father and I, we realized our mistake. The treaty is void. You belong with your people. With me. Kale's growl was low, a tectonic shift that made the Southerners stumble back. He didn't move to attack. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Astria, giving her the space to own the ground she stood upon. Astria walked toward Liam. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell the familiar scent of the south, and realize it smelled like stagnant water compared to the bracing frost of the north. You came to rescue me? She asked. Her voice was a soft blade. Where were you when I was thrown into a cage? Where were you when the axe was raised? We were mobilizing, Liam lied, his eyes darting to Kale's massive frame. The north is dangerous, Astria. This monster cannot give you the life you deserve. Astria laughed. It was a bright, cold sound that cut through the wind. You are right about one thing, Liam, she said, stepping into his personal space. He flinched. He is a monster to his enemies. But to me? He is the only man who ever saw me when I was invisible. You didn't reject me because I was weak, Liam. You rejected me because you were too small to hold the fire I carried. She turned her back on him, the ultimate insult to an alpha. Go home, Gregor, she said to her former alpha. Tell the South that the king and queen of the North are no longer accepting tributes. We are only accepting vows. Chapter 23, The Feast of the Reborn. The Great Hall was no longer a theater of judgment, it was a cathedral of light. Thousands of candles burned in the rafters, their wax dripping like slow, golden honey. The long tables were packed with every member of the Northern Alliance, but there was a new addition. The servants sat among the warriors. The disposables sat among the nobles. Astria sat at Kale's side. She watched as he raised a goblet, the gold reflecting the violet spark in his eyes that had never faded. To the queen! Kale shouted. His voice was no longer a jagged rasp, it was a rich, melodic baritone that filled every corner of the room. To the woman who spoke to the silence until it answered. To the queen, the room roared back. The feast was a riot of laughter and music. Astria felt the bond, no longer a chain, but a warm, living pulse, connecting her to every soul in the room. She realized that the core emotional question had finally found its answer. She was not worthy because she was chosen. She was worthy because she had the courage to choose herself first, and in doing so, she became someone worth choosing. Cale leaned in, his hand sliding under the table to rest on her thigh. The heat of him was a constant, grounding force. "You are thinking again," he murmured against her ear. "Your mind is a busy hive, my love." "I am thinking about the stories," Astria said, turning to him. "The ones they will tell about us. Will they say we were fated?" Cale shook his head. He picked up a piece of fruit and fed it to her, his thumb lingering on her bottom lip. "They will say we were a disaster," he smiled. "They will say a broken girl and a mute king tore the world apart just to hear each other breathe. And they will be right." He stood, pulling her with him. He didn't lead her to the head of the table. He led her toward the center of the hall, toward the open space where the music was loudest. "Dance with me, Astria," he commanded softly. "The king doesn't dance," she teased, though she was already moving into his arms. "The mute king didn't," Cale whispered, spinning her into a blur of silk and fur. "But the man you made? He does whatever his queen requires." Chapter 24, The Vow of the Eternal North. The moon was a silver coin tossed against the velvet black of the midnight sky. Astria and Cale stood on the highest balcony of the citadel, far above the noise of the celebration. The snow had stopped, leaving the world in a state of pristine, crystalline silence. This was their true world, the quiet, the cold, and the infinite. Cale pulled a small dagger from his belt. It wasn't obsidian or steel, it was carved from the bone of a great north bear. "The curse is broken," Cale said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "But the blood remains. I want to make a new deal, Astria. Not with demons. With you." He sliced a shallow line across his palm. Astria didn't hesitate. She took the blade and did the same. They pressed their palms together. The blood mingled, hot and thick, as the bond between them flared with a blinding, white-gold light. This wasn't a fated mate bond forced by a goddess, this was a vow of choice. "I, Cale Thornblack, choose you as my equal," he intoned. "My voice is yours. My strength is yours. My life is the shield before your heart." "I, Astria, choose you as my king," she replied, her eyes locked on his. "Your silence is my sanctuary. Your heart is my home. I am no longer a shadow, I am the light that guides you." The magic of the north took the words and wove them into the atmosphere. The aurora borealis erupted above them, curtains of green and violet silk dancing across the stars. It was the sky's approval. Cale pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like a cloak of iron and velvet. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over hers. "No more secrets?" he asked. "No more secrets," she promised. He kissed her then, not with the desperation of a dying man, but with the slow, burning passion of a man who had all the time in the world. The story of the mute Alpha King and his rejected Luna ended there, in the cold and the dark. But as they looked out over their kingdom, Astria knew it was only the beginning. They were no longer characters in a tragic legend. They were the authors of a new era. Love wasn't destiny. It was defiance. And as the sun began to peek over the frozen horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, Astria finally knew what it felt like to be home.